This is going to be big. Really, really big. It's about the plane that won the war.
After you had flown in it, you had faith in it.
It's about men who flew into the darkness.
We were just schoolboys.
And rained down fire. Above all, it's about the thousands who gave their lives flying in it.
You didn't see dead bodies, you just saw empty beds.
And the people they were prepared to die for.
I often wish I could go back in time, just to see him once more. And Dad.
This is not a love letter. It's not as simple as that, but it is a tribute to a hellraiser, a lifesaver, a downbuster, and the most magnificent 7 Britain has ever had. This is the Lancaster. I've come to Lincolnshire to see one of my boyhood heroes, a British heavyweight champion of the skies. As a child, I would have given anything to see it up close. But as I get nearer to it now, I feel almost apprehensive. Deep breath. Here we go. There it is, the Lancaster. It really takes your breath away. 156,000 times, Lancaster bombers like this one flew into occupied Europe to break the Nazis' stranglehold on the continent. From 1942 to the bitter end, more than 500,000 tons of Lancaster bombs kept tens of thousands of German troops and pilots tied up at home. While the Russians advanced from the east, D-Day was being planned in the west. But nearly half of the crews who took part in these raids never came home. Over 20,000 young men paid for the Lancaster's success with their lives. Lancaster crews led raid after raid on Germany's industrial heartland. Railways, factories, shipyards and dams were targeted, and Germany's great cities were destroyed. It was brutal, hard to stomach, and incredibly effective. After the war, in a letter to the people who built the plane, Marshal of the RAF, Sir Arthur Harris, said, "This aircraft was the greatest single factor in winning the war." But the origins of the plane gave no indication of how important it would become. Strangely, this 1 in a million aircraft started life as an entirely different plane, a 2-engine bomber called the Avro Lancaster. But there was one problem with the Manc. It was absolutely useless. The MOD were so unimpressed, they considered scrapping it entirely. But Avro's chief engineer, Roy Chadwick, wasn't going to let his new bomber go down without a fight. He argued that the Manchester should be upgraded, not scrapped. The solution? Just make it bigger. It needed longer wings, a new tail unit, and 4 mighty Merlin engines. Then there was the vast bomb bay stretching 2/3 of the length of the aircraft. By the end of the war, this 33-foot-long cavern would carry the Grand Slam, a 10-ton bomb. No other bomber came close. The new aircraft needed a new name. The Manchester became the Lancaster.
And here's a sight become increasingly routine, a Lancaster leaving the sheds for its test flight.
Now we're going back to the 1940s, to a time in Britain when hundreds of Lancaster bombers flying past gave hope. At last, we could hit back. We're going to meet the people who built them, cherished them, even found love through them. This is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. We'll be going wingtip to wingtip with Britain's very last flying Lancaster bomber. Captain Roger Nichols will have the pleasure of flying the old Lanc, while I will get to see the plane in all its glory alongside, with my old friend and ace pilot, Bill Giles. At top speed of over 300 miles an hour, it could fly at 24,500 feet and had a range of over 2,500 miles. It was the best bomber of the Second World War. Right, I'm watching it take off now, and what a great moment. Just seeing this big plane lift off as if it's just a bird in the sky. You can just see it now in the corner. It's banking, it's going just a little bit slower than we are, but we're still going to have to catch her up. Oh, that's terrific. We are now about 100 yards from the Lancaster. We're in formation flying with, I have to say, the most beautiful aircraft I've ever seen. Looks beautiful, but also when you get closer and you can see the machine guns, it looks rather sinister. It's that combination of style, beauty, and also I'm going to get you, or you're in trouble if you see this.
You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end, would you?
This is the sound of my childhood dream, really, these big engines coming over our village in Oxfordshire, and you thought, that's life, that's excitement, if only I could be part of it. And here I am, years later, and I am part of it. The Lancaster is now right underneath us. Now, that's not what you'd expect to see. This great big plane is as if it's a little model aircraft with a patchwork of England underneath. This was the dangerous position for the Lancaster because they were often hit by the bombs falling on them from above. You could be hit by friendly fire. The average age of a Lancaster crew member was just 22. Life expectancy for a new recruit was just 2 weeks, about the same as in the trenches during the First World War. To try to understand what it was like to fly in Lancasters, we've gathered together an extraordinary group of men. They are the secret of the plane's success. The 7 men it took to fly it. This is a very special moment. Our very own 2014 World War II Lancaster bomber crew. Each man carried out one of the 7 essential roles on a Lancaster. Pilot Rusty Warman, navigator Paul Bland, bomb aimer John Bell, flight engineer Frank Tilley, wireless operator John DeHoop, mid-gunner Harry Irons, and the man in the tail, rear gunner Dave Fellows. These 7 men flew hundreds of sorties into enemy territory, and nearly 70 years later are still here to tell me about it. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hello, sir.
I'm very pleased to see you. I've met a few special people over the years, but I'm not sure any one of them has made me feel quite like I do right now. Now,
Nice to meet you.
you're the pilot, aren't you?
Yes, I'm the pilot, yes.
So it's your job to tell me about all the crew.
Oh, God.
A lot of the pilots didn't know left from right, though, did they?
Rusty and the rest of our crew never flew together in the 1940s. But back then, finding out who you were going to fly with was a bit of a lottery.
They got the pilots, the navigator, the bomber, wireless operator, put them all in a big room and said, sort yourself out into crews.
And how did that work, though? Because you wouldn't know each other. You would...
No idea.
So you
No
just...
idea at all. In my case, I was lucky. I got on the train at Crewe to go to Stafford. In walked 3 Australian flight sergeant pilots. We got chatting, and one of them, who came from Sydney, his mother knew my aunt. So he said to me, well, come on, we have something in common. Come fly with me. Yeah. And I did.
So the whole thing was by chance?
Absolutely.
Sheer chance.
Yes.
And then you acted as a family. The
Then you
seven
were
of you-
bonded.
Yes.
You bonded together.
And you knew exactly what each other was going to say and what we're going to do.
You depended on each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the thing that bonded you together.
Yeah.
I can honestly say, though, that we were convinced that we were going to survive, but everybody probably went out on an operation with that thought in mind, and some were unlucky.
If you didn't have luck, you never had a chance. No chance.
They make light of it now, but each one of these men were putting their lives on the line every time they stepped on board a Lancaster. And the loneliest job of all, the rear gunner. So this is where you'd be?
Yes, this was my office. This is where I used to sit for anything up to perhaps 10 hours at a time.
But did you feel very isolated? You're right at the back.
Well, I preferred it that way. It was my choice. It was cosy.
Until the anti-aircraft fire came up.
Well, it was part of the job.
Did the rest of you? Even in their 90s, these men are clearly tough. The gunners in particular haven't lost the self-confidence that allowed them to carry out their dangerous mission in such an exposed position. But ultimately, the Lancaster crew had one goal: to drop bombs. And that responsibility fell to John Bell. Is this where you are?
Yes, that's my office, the front of the aeroplane room.
Right. So you're looking... Do you look through this
I'm
thing?
looking through that piece of perspex there, yes. The bomb site is within that.
Is this a hard job, being the bomber? What do the rest of you think?
easy job.
Really?
Yeah, he just laid there and went to sleep and just pressed the tick.
I bet that's not what you think.
No, it's not what I think, no.
Our veteran Lancaster crew give us an incredible insight into life inside this extraordinary weapon during the war. And I could listen to my new friend's stories all day, but I wouldn't be doing the Lancaster justice if I didn't try and learn a little bit more about some of the boys who never came home. And that means going east, into Germany. So what's the actual plan?
Right, well, we're going to be starting off in Kent here, and then we'll follow this line up through into the Netherlands, and then our final destination is
Right
here.
up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't bring the old Lancaster with me on this trip. Its raids into Germany are long over, thank goodness. Right, we're off then. You better keep them.
Great, lovely.
Because it's important that you know where we're going. So it's time to climb back on board Bill's six-seater for what might just be the most dramatic chapter of my Lancaster adventure. We're off.
Clear, prop!
Off up into the clouds, following the vapor trails of the historic Lancasters. It's the stuff of my childhood dreams. And it's not half bad as an adult. But before we leave British shores, I want to learn more about the people who built these incredible aircraft.
Lancasters are being built in several factories in Britain and Canada. The RAF is depending on them for Lancasters, and yet more Lancasters.
Today in Yeadon, there's not much evidence of the wartime factory that employed thousands of men and women from all over the north. But if you look closely, there are still clues to the old Lancaster plant.
There'll be bluebirds
Back then, the factory was camouflaged. It's said they put fake cows on the green roof to make it look like a farmer's field. To confuse German aerial reconnaissance, a sloped roof was built so no shadow would fall around the building. Inside, hundreds of people were putting the finishing touches to the aircraft they hoped would swing the war in Britain's favour. Kathleen Rockcliffe was just 20 years old when she started work at Yeadon.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. Good Lord.
Let's say it again. The finest bomber in the world, built in British factories by British labour.
Kathleen's job was to inspect the aircraft's giant bomb bays.
It was absolutely damned unbelievable, to be honest, because the thing, it was so big. And I think at first I was overawed with it all. And I felt quite hopeless as a starter, because I was never a worldly girl, you know what I mean? Brought up to sort of just do fairly quiet stuff.
Meet a few of the ordinary, hard-working people devoted to this important task. Angela Roberts, a capstan operator. Maisie Rafferty at a press. Little Billy, drilling. Let there be no doubt or argument about it. The skill and application of the workers in the aircraft factories is a great source of strength in our progress towards victory.
We had these huge torches, and then you had to look around everything there was. All the things that were screwed onto the bomb bay that had to be there, you know, numbers, figures, bits of appliances. We had to learn what was done correctly, what wasn't. I just sometimes think when I look at it in the sky, well, you never know. Just maybe I might have been in there, just in that bit. And it might be one of the ones that I had worked on. You see, at the time, you don't feel it as much because you're busy working. But then as you get older and time goes on, you realise that everything certainly did matter, you know?
The war had been going on for 2.5 years before the first Lancaster bombers came into service. By then, our cities had been blitzed, Hitler held sway over most of continental Europe, and the Americans had only just come into the war. The bald fact was, we were losing. The first part of the war was particularly disappointing for Bomber Command. In 1941, an investigation found that only 30% of bombers who claimed to have landed their bombs accurately were within 5 miles of their target. The arrival of the Lancaster would signal a major change, and at night, under cover of darkness, it would come into its own.
Watch your height. I'm watching everything. Okay.
You searched the skies for something perhaps you didn't want to see. Your job was to look out for a fighter, maybe wanting to make an attack on you.
How many searchlights would you call them? Too many, I reckon. Why, God, I've never seen anything like this before in a lie. Do the pipe.
The raids were terrible.
Keep your eyes peeled. They're firing at us now.
We were very much aware of being shot down.
You cannot describe the horrendous barrage that the Germans put up.
We saw aircraft being shot down, going down in flames, or being caught in searchlights, not being able to escape.
My God, you light your fag on any of those. Keep on weaving together.
A couple of minutes from the target, really the bomber took over.
Left, right, until you know that the bomb site is directly on the target.
Steady.
I would get out in front of the aeroplane looking at the whole of this mass of exploding shells and thinking, how are we going to get through it?
I didn't
feel very happy when we run operations, but you never say anything to anybody else.
Bomb doors open, bombs away. There goes the cookie, and there go the assemblies.
We volunteered for this. I mean, a lot of people think we were mad, but we knew what we were going into.
One of the most significant bombing missions of the war took place on the night of August the 17th, 1943. It involved nearly 600 planes, most of them Lancasters. The target was a small fishing village on the Baltic coast. Its name, Peenemünde. The attack came in 3 waves. First in were the Pathfinders, whose target flares lit up the scene.
We arrived and there wasn't much happening because I think they thought we were going to Berlin.
They knew the people on the ground weren't expecting an attack on Peenemünde. Surprise was the key. Scientist Boto Stuve was in Peenemünde as the Lancasters and the rest of the bomber stream approached.
Wir haben uns dann praktisch 10 Uhr war Zapfenstreich, wie üblich. Und dann haben wir uns in Betten gelegt und haben geschlafen und dann kam Fliegeralarm. Wir haben also versucht, den Engländern vorzumachen, dass hier nichts weiter vorhanden ist. Und das war aber nicht der Fall.
The raid on Peenemünde followed a similar pattern to many other Lancaster sorties. It was ambitious, daring, and ultimately successful. But as ever, it came with a very high price for the crews involved. There was more to this obscure German outpost than met the eye. This small fishing village held a dark secret. Peenemünde was the home of the Germans' secret missile program, the birthplace of the astonishing V-1 and V-2 rockets which terrorized the British mainland. By destroying it, the entire course of the war could be altered. And there ahead of us is Peenemünde. I've known that name since I was a kid. Oh right, and now we can see right down there in front of that main building, there is a V-2 rocket. Now, this was an amazingly important site. Peenemünde is a remarkable place. Everywhere I look, another ghostly reminder of the war. This abandoned Nazi barracks was built for the thousands of soldiers and scientists stationed here during the 30s and 40s. It had every possible convenience, even a theatre to entertain the troops. I've got the official plan of the Lancaster attack, dated 4th July 1943. Description. The target is the experimental rocket projectile establishment at Peenemünde. The whole complex includes experimental station, assembly plant, living quarters, etc., as follows. Power plant situated to the west of the complex. I can honestly say I've never seen anything quite like this. 50 years behind the Iron Curtain seems to have preserved this building perfectly. It's now part of an excellent museum. What an amazing place, isn't it? It's still quite frightening, but also thrilling. Historian Nick Jackson is an expert on wartime Germany.
This is the prime target. This is exactly what Bomber Command were looking for.
And this is the power station?
Exactly. It's from here that the entire power supply for the whole missile development complex originates.
It's so Germanic, isn't it? These are people who are very confident. This is not like a factory in the north of England. This is not a British Victorian factory. It's we're going to do this. We are going to be the biggest and the best in the world. There's a sort of James Bond element, isn't there?
There is, the evil empire.
We are going to run the world from this secret factory. There's a bit of that too.
Remember, of course, that there would have been another huge boiler complex sitting on these foundations here.
What, so this would have been over this great big pit?
That's right.
I can imagine Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, a great big man, standing here, just thinking, we've got this right. We'll win the war with this. But Goering and his Luftwaffe didn't win the war. And the raid on Peenemünde proved a vital step on the road to Allied victory. Bomber Command's plan of attack reveals how much intelligence had been gathered in advance of the raid. It lays out in stark terms what the real target was. The most chilling bit comes at the end, the living and sleeping quarters, with the object of killing or incapacitating as many of the scientific and technical personnel as possible.
So from up here, John, you can see how enormous the complex is. It actually started over there.
Yeah?
In 1936. And a huge wave of over 7,000 technicians and staff and soldiers pour into the peninsula and create this enormous complex. Over here, there's the airport and the V1 testing areas. Further to the right, the main missile launch areas and engine test stands. A huge settlement complex lying along the Baltic coast for the staff themselves. And then, of course, here, the port for the delivery of coal for the power station that we're standing on now. So absolutely enormous.
So on the 17th of August, the night of 17th of August, the bombers in their hundreds are coming right across here. I mean, that must have been frightening for those people here.
Can you imagine the sound and that number of bombers? You would have been able to feel them.
This raid was the first to use a master bomber who coordinated the attack from the air. One by one, key sites were obliterated. But the greatest loss of life was not among German scientists or technical staff. So most of the people who were killed in the Lancaster raid were prisoners.
That's right, they're kept in flimsy wooden barracks, guarded and surrounded by barbed wire. For them, there was no escape.
And these barracks, these are some of them that remain from that time.
Some still survive.
And there were concentration camp victims too brought here.
There were many, in total around 1,500, some from concentration camps, Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen, others from Poland, the majority, Dutch, French, Russian prisoners of war.
And the irony was that they would have thought that the British force would have been on their side, would have been their allies, but in that awful modern phrase, they were caught in friendly fire.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah. The loss of life was not all on the ground. Inevitably, many of the bomber boys paid the ultimate price. By the time the third wave of bombers reached Peenemünde, the German response was well underway. Hundreds of Messerschmitt 110s arrived with their new twin upward-firing cannons.
All that to do was fly straight and level underneath you and just give you a little squirt in the petrol tank, and up you went.
In total, Bomber Command lost 40 aircraft that night. 23 were Lancasters. Not one was recovered. 243 aircrew lost their lives. 45 were captured. 180 Germans were killed. Between 500 and 600 Polish workers died. The raid set back Hitler's missile program by between 3 and 6 months. The V1 and V2 rockets still went on to cause devastation on the British mainland, but the delay was critical. President Eisenhower said, if the Germans had succeeded in perfecting and using these new weapons earlier, our invasion of Europe would have proved exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible. It was a landmark moment for the Lancaster, a brilliantly coordinated, daring raid which took the enemy completely by surprise. It meant from now on, nowhere in Germany would be safe. It should have made heroes of Bomber Command, but in wartime, nothing is as simple as that. The Lancaster was instrumental in all major bombing raids from 1942 until the end of the war. Most, like Peenemünde, were successful, even celebrated. Most, but certainly not all. On the 14th of February 1945, 3 months before VE Day, Allied aircraft destroyed the East German city of Dresden. 800 RAF bombers, mostly Lancasters, pummeled the city with high explosives and incendiaries. Around 20,000 civilians were killed. The bombers faced little in the way of resistance, and the total destruction of Dresden was completed when over 300 American bombers struck the following day. It caused international outrage, but many of those from Bomber Command still believe Dresden was a legitimate target.
The war wasn't over until the German generals signed the treaty.
People were still being killed. V2s were still being fired into London.
Winston Churchill had urged Bomber Command to attack East German cities, but he tried to disassociate himself from this raid.
What he done to us was terrible, Churchill. What he done. He completely ignored us, and it was him that told us to go.
The Dresden attack still divides opinion.
I agree with Churchill, it was unnecessary.
After all this sacrifice, the courage of the men and women of Bomber Command still went unheralded after the war. Eventually, nearly 70 years later, a fitting memorial was erected right in the heart of the capital they helped to save. But even then, they had to raise most of the money themselves for it to be built. Whatever they got, the Bomber Boys never got it easy. Dresden didn't signal the end of the Lancasters' war. In April 1945, the versatile bomber took on a humanitarian role, dropping food packages to the starving people of northern Holland.
We all sailed in 500 feet, lovely, dropped our food, and there was the Dutch waving to us.
During Operation Exodus, the Lanc became synonymous with victory and escape. Thousands of POWs found their way home thanks to the Big Heavy. 10 years after the war, the Lancaster crews found themselves thrust into the limelight in a rather surprising way. A film about the exploits of 617 Squadron, bombing the great German dams in the Ruhr Valley, made Hollywood heroes of a scientist called Barnes Wallis and a remarkable group of men, the Dam Busters. On the 16th of May 1943, even those closest to the plan had no idea how Operation Chastise would transform their lives. 19 bombers were used on the raid, all were Lancasters. 133 airmen took part. Flight Sergeant George "Johnny" Johnson was a bomb aimer. His target was the Sorpe Dam. Today, he is Britain's last surviving dam buster.
So after the briefing, into the mess for the good old operational meal, egg and bacon, which was regular, then eventually out to the aircraft.
Lancaster pilot Stevie Stevens, part of 57 Squadron, also based at Scampton, remembers watching the dam busters prepare for takeoff.
Certainly I had noticed a difference in armoury on these aircraft because they had these curious things like large dustbins mounted laterally.
21-year-old Maureen Miller was one of the first female radio operators of the war. She was on duty the day Johnny and the rest of 617 Squadron prepared for their mission.
There was an awful lot of secrecy surrounding the airfield that particular day. Of course, nobody really knew the reason why. As each plane took off, the pilot's name, the letter of the aircraft, and the time of takeoff was put up on a board. And that would remain, of course, until they came back.
My perception was, well, they'd taken off, good luck chaps, and I hope get back safely, and that was it.
Eventually, we found the Zorba. Barnes Wallace had estimated that it would take at least 6 bombs to crack that dam. If you can crack it, he said, the water pressure will do the rest. My real feelings at that stage were concentration on the job that I'd got to do and making sure that I got that bomb as near as I possibly could to the target. If I wasn't satisfied, I called dummy run. And after the 6th or 7th dummy run, a voice from the rear turret, "Won't somebody get that bomb out of here?" And on the 10th run, we were down to 30 feet. And when I said bomb gone, thank Christ came from the rear turret. I didn't see the explosion. Dave did in the rear turret. And he estimated that the tower of water went up to about 1,000 feet. And when we circled, we found we had just crumbled the top of the dam. And so we set course for home from there. And I suppose the most satisfying part of that trip was that our course home took us over what had been the Moan, by which time it had been breached. There was water everywhere. It was just like an inland sea, and it was still coming out of the dam. And so we had a satisfaction of seeing something that had really been achieved.
I think the dam busters came back in the early hours, perhaps 4-ish, when they returned. It was lovely to hear their voices, and I think they were extremely glad to hear ours.
Nearly half the Lancs that took part in the raid were destroyed, and 53 of the airmen involved were killed. Mary Wallace was at boarding school when news of the famous raid reached her. Mary and her father, Barnes Wallace, had tested his theory of bouncing bombs using marbles. She was so excited, she wrote to him immediately. Today, Britain's last dam buster and I are privileged to hear what she wrote.
I wrote him the most excited letter I think I must ever have written in my life. On the 20th of May, 1943. My darling Daddy, hooray, hooray, hooray. Wonderful marbles, up the marbles. Cheers, cheers, cheers. Oh, well done, Daddy. I've been bouncing around and leaping up and down stairs and beaming at all the staff and hugging all my little friends with exuberance ever since I got Mooey's card, proclaiming the great news. Everybody thinks I'm a bit potty because I'm so pleased but won't say why. But I sincerely hope that you will have a little bit of rest now and then, and the dear people will stop bothering you. I am overflowing with excitement and admiration. Excuse the paper, no more to hand. With very much love, congratulations and pride, Wiggy. P.S. As special congratulations.
What a lovely letter.
Wonderful.
And he kept that. He must have been proud of you as well as you being proud of him.
I think he was probably pleased, yes.
But it's an extraordinary example of how you at that stage were right in on it, weren't you? You knew all about what was happening.
Oh, I knew what was happening.
But was he secretive? This was a top secret mission.
No, he was never secretive.
Really?
No, indeed not. No, he never told us, don't tell. You mustn't say anything about that. Because the minute you say that to a young person, or indeed to some rather older people, they immediately tell their best friends over a pint in the pub or in the dormitory.
And what did he think about the raid? I mean, what did he say about that?
Well, of course, he was proud, glad, grateful to the Lord. He was always grateful to the Lord. He never took much praise for himself. But what shattered him and really bit into his soul was the loss of life, which he never got over, never.
He said, I've killed all those young men.
Yes, he did.
And I understand that he cried,
Yes,
actually,
he did.
in the briefing room.
Mm.
And although Gibson tried to relay it a little
Yes.
by explaining that without you, that raid could never have taken place. We would never have had that success that we've had this night. And whenever we took off on any of those raids, we knew there was always a chance that we wouldn't come back. And it was no difference on this raid from any other. I don't think that consoled him, but I think it may have just taken the edge of it a little bit.
To you, he was always a great man.
Yes, always.
And that was the feeling of the squadron generally. I mean, he was extremely popular with the squadron, although...
That meant a lot to him. It really
and it
did.
was the sort of thing which they found that he had done something for them which they couldn't possibly have done without him. He'd really made a difference to their work.
The Dambusters story became one of the best known of the war. But there was another story developing on the night Johnny and his fellow Dambusters returned from Germany. And this one, too, has a very Hollywood ending. At RAF Scampton, Lancaster pilot Steve Stevens had begun to take a more than professional interest in one of the ladies on the base. The problem was, he had never laid eyes on her. Hello.
Hello, John.
How very nice to see you.
Do come in.
Thank you.
The call sign of the station was Biddy. So I called up, hello, Biddy, whatever my call sign was, Lingerie, over, and she said, hello, Lingerie, Pancake. And that was the first conversation we'd had. Pancake meant the runway was clear and you could land. It's so unusual because I'd never heard a woman's voice transmitting before, not even in America.
Really?
So when I got here and I just heard this voice, I thought, crikey, a girl, and I'm going to see what she looks like. Well, of course, I went up to flying control, but it was so busy, and I was a frog around the place, so I came away again.
Well, you were a bit shy, were you?
More than a bit. Yes, terrified. And then...
Well, what did she look like?
Well, just like she looks now, really, to me. She's a striking blonde, actually. And that's why she was surrounded by so many men, I suspect.
And then 70 years later, you look back on that.
Yes.
And what do you think about it? What do you think about the
I'm
whole
delighted.
thing? Yes. The lady in question was Maureen Miller, but for the last 70 years, she's been Maureen Stevens. Hello.
Hello.
Now, I've been talking to Steve, and he's been telling me all about the first time that he saw you.
Yes.
And he was very impressed.
Yes.
He thought he would never be able to go out with you. Do you remember that?
I remember him coming in. I don't know why he actually came up to the control tower.
He wants to see you.
But, yes, I think it was purely curiosity. And I remembered, whilst he was talking, I thought, now that young man would make a girl a very good husband. I honestly never, ever dreamed he would be my husband.
Isn't that extraordinary?
I don't think I've ever told Stevie that before, but it's absolutely true.
So at that stage, you did think,
That was my secret for years, but yes. And then I got posted to Scampton just before the Dambusters raid, and I went off duty and walked down the road, and there was Stevie waiting on the path opposite. Whether he found out what time I was on duty, I suppose he had. He might well have been flying at some time.
Now, he told me that he'd been waiting there for half an hour for you.
Oh, did he? Oh, well, there you are. You can't wait too long for a good thing, can you?
But also, if you look at this picture, you look a perfect couple, don't you?
Yes. He did have rather lovely dark brown curly hair, but I don't think it was even that attracted me. It was the person himself. It was the brave man. I thought he's doing a very, very wonderful job, going to battle every night. Probably that was it.
You start going out in May, but by the end of the year, you're married, aren't you?
Yeah, married on the 4th of December, 1943.
Well, that's pretty quick, isn't it?
Well, I suppose it was, really. Yes.
Did you feel that both of you were serving the country?
Absolutely.
And that was vital?
That was absolutely vital. It was, in fact, I think it was the war that held us together. It's something, even now, when I look back after 70 years, that, Just one of those things.
Well, here's the man himself.
Oh,
Hello,
Steve.
Steve. Right, well...
Would you bring me a coaster, dear, please? There's some down there.
We got... No, wait a minute.
know the coasters.
Right, we've got this here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Stevie. Bless you, that's lovely.
Are you going to sit there, Stevie?
Of course, yes.
Right. Well...
Right, that's fine.
And we were talking about how much the war mattered in terms of both of you getting together.
We just had a matter of weeks, or maybe if we're lucky, it could either have been days, of course, really, I suppose.
Now, Steve told me that you were the first person he kissed.
He wasn't the first person I kissed, not by a long shot.
No.
No, I loved the odd bit of romance, yes, of course.
And he was romantic, wasn't he?
He still is.
And what is the secret then? What do you think the secret is?
We keep holding hands.
Yes?
Yes, we hold hands when we go out, don't we?
Yes, indeed.
We hold hands, we go all over the place.
Because if we don't hold hands, we'd fall down.
We have this, I suppose, symbiotic relationship, really. We depend totally on each other.
And that's terrific,
still
isn't it?
do.
She's got the brains, the memory, and of course the hearing. I'm quite sure what I've got.
Who would have thought it? Steve and Maureen, the Lancaster lovers, a perfect love story. Britain's Lancaster generation. There are just so many great tales. But at the beginning, I said we must pay tribute to those boys who didn't come home. Men like rear gunner Stan Shaw and his crew. Stan's daughter, Elaine, now in her 80s, remembers her father and his Lancaster, DV-202.
We had some nice times together, really did. They were only boys. 2 or 3 of them were only 19, I think. I know my dad was the old man of the crew because he was 31, well, he was 31 when he died. And they were very close, I think, all of them.
Elaine last saw her father at her grandmother's house. It was an unexpected visit. Stan only had a few short hours before his next raid.
I often wish, that I could go back in time just to see him once more. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I loved him to bits. I still remember what he looked like. And he'll never change, he'll never get old. He'll always be my dad as I saw him last. I was proud of him. I've always been proud of him. I always will be proud of him. But I wish he hadn't have gone.
Stan Shaw and the crew of DV-202 were just 7 from tens of thousands of British service men and women recorded as lost without trace after the Second World War. All are remembered by the memorial at Runnymede. DV-202's last flight took off from Dunholm Lodge in Lincolnshire at 9:40 p.m. on August the 17th, 1943. They were headed for Peenemünde. Most of the Lancasters that were lost went down in the sea or crashed into these woods. All of them have disappeared. All but one. This is Lake Kolpinsee, just a few hundred yards from the missile base at Peenemünde. During the raid, Botto Stuve watched as a Lancaster Mark III was shot down by German night fighters and crashed into the lake.
Da sah ich ein Aufblitzen von einer Leuchtspurkette. Nachtjäger, jetzt endlich. Und dann nicht nur die Leuchtspurkette, sondern eine Explosion, ein Feuerball. Und dieser Feuerball blieb erhalten und ist von dort aus, vom Treffpunkt, in einer Fallparabel in den Kolpinsee niedergegangen.
There were 40 aircraft lost during the raid on Peenemünde. Not one is recorded as crashing into a lake. After the war, a special team was set up to search for those lost. They'd heard the rumours of the Lancaster in the lake. It was never found, but it is here. a Lancaster Mark III, part of the third and final wave. And here in Peenemünde, they have no doubt who the rear gunner was.
He was worried, I think, because he'd got to go and he couldn't see my mum. And he got his uniform on. I didn't have time to clean his buttons that time. And I ran to the bottom of the street and waved.
It was the last time Elaine saw her father. She tries to go to the Runnymede Memorial every year to pay respect to her dad. But she's never been here to Peenemünde until now. Hello, Elaine.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Your hands are cold.
I'm sorry there. Are you all right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Right, let's... One of Elaine's sons, Russell, has come to support his mother. Hello.
Hello, John.
Very nice to meet you.
Pleased to meet you too.
Yeah.
Russell.
Yeah. It's, now we've just got to go down here. It's the little jetty.
Right.
It's a very desolate sort of area, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
It is desolate.
We are now finally on the side of the lake. Now, can you see over there? Can you see that sort of little white thing?
Yeah.
Now, that is part of the Lancaster.
I've been waiting a long time. I really have to see this. I didn't think I'd ever see it.
This is very likely where your father died. But it's good that you're here, isn't it?
Yes, very good. It's wonderful because I can say goodbye. And not just my dad, the rest of the crew. They used to come home with Dad sometimes, and I got to know them quite well. And they used to bring us sweeties. You just can't imagine it when you're that age. You don't understand it. I knew that something had happened. We didn't know where he was going because he wasn't allowed to tell us. But it was in one of the letters that we got to say that he'd lost his life while on the way to Peenemünde.
And look at the sun coming through the clouds. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Like two searchlights. Oh, yes, it's a lovely place. It really is.
In 1948, Elaine's mother, Elsie, received a letter from the Red Cross. By then, the Russian army controlled Peenemünde. They had received information from local people that all of the crew from the Lancaster in the lake had been removed from the wreck. All were dead. 4 of the airmen were buried on the lake shore. One of them was named as Flight Sergeant Stanley Shaw. No evidence of the graves exist.
That's all that's left. That little bit of metal. Of 7 men's lives. It's still here.
Are you glad you came?
Yes, I am very glad. I wish my sister was here too. I've tried to do what he asked me to do the last time I saw him. I saw him last, Mum didn't. He asked me to give Mum my love and a kiss and look after her and look after Pam. That was my baby sister. She was only a year and a half.
For you, it's not the war, it's a personal tragedy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very moving, isn't it?
Very moving, and I never thought I'd do it. I never thought I'd see it.
And do you feel closer to him now?
Yeah, I do. I do. If there's such a thing as, I don't know whether there is or not, he'll be watching. And he'll know. I think it will. Don't you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where he is, but we know that he was here at some point.
I shall never do anything like this again. It's once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime.
I genuinely believe that this is my grandfather's plane, and I know that I'm not alone in that. But the official sources will neither confirm or deny that. But I think for my mother, I'm not sure it really matters, because grandfather was here at some point, and we know that he lost his life here. And that's important to us to have closure for my mum, and I'm so glad she came.
So am I. So am I. That's Reg.
Yeah?
Billy. Peter. Mac. Les. Tom. And Dad.
History records that the Second World War started in 1939 and lasted until 1945. But for some, that doesn't tell the whole story. Elaine's war ended this morning on a lake in Peenemünde. There is only one British Lancaster bomber left flying today, and that's poignant, because the Lanc was never about one of anything. It was about a team, maybe the bravest we've ever had.
We had no common bond, save that of youth.
No shared ambition.
Except to venture and survive.
It carries so many memories and a great chunk of our history. This is the last of the many. And for me, it's been a great honor to tell the Lancaster story.
To those who chronicled the great events we flew in Lancasters.
If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream, where mobile steel rims crack